Hello interwebs! For today's video, I want to announce a brand new, really exciting project that I'm actually super pumped to share with all of you, as well as, kind of on that same note, kind of share something really personal about myself, and share something really personal to me, and something that I'm honestly just excited that I have given myself an avenue to share and express. So what am I even talking about? What am I alluding to here? Well, as many of you may know, like most YouTubers and creators, I have a Patreon page. It's where all of you can go and help support me in this YouTube endeavor. You can help me, and basically all of my creative endeavors. You can help me get to do this full time one day. You help me get money to buy better equipment and do greater and bigger projects. You also help encourage me as well. Like, just being a patron is very encouraging to know that, like, people want to support me. It's honestly, it's just the very fact that anyone wants to support me in any way is just surprising and humbling, and just keeps me motivated to keep doing this project. But enough about me. You yourself, if you join my Patreon, get some cool perks as well. You get your name in videos. You can join some of our cool community over on the Discord server that I have. Some really cool stuff like that. But for today, I want to announce that I'm going to be starting a new exclusive Patreon project, and that is a brand new podcast called The Long Road. And yes, that, if my outfit didn't make it clear, that name, The Long Road, is in reference to "It's been a long road, getting from there to here. It's been a long..." No, I won't subject you to the whole song, but it is in reference to the theme song of Star Trek Enterprise. Yes, I am going to be doing a podcast over on my Patreon page that is going to be a complete episode-by-episode rewatch of Star Trek Enterprise, which, to be honest with you, I don't think it is the best Star Trek show, but for me personally, it is my favorite Star Trek show. And there are quite a few reasons for that, and a lot of the reasons why Star Trek Enterprise is my favorite Star Trek show are very personal to me. And so, the first episode of my podcast that I recorded was actually not rewatching an episode, but sharing some of those reasons and that personal story behind why Star Trek Enterprise means so much to me. And as I was recording that podcast, it really felt like it was something that I really wanted to share with a greater audience, because I feel like Star Trek Enterprise is a show that does not get the love and attention that it deserves. It's kind of like the ugly duckling of the Star Trek franchise. It was definitely hated when it came out, and it doesn't really get remembered as much as it really could have been, because it sort of just kind of got lost at the tail end of that era of Star Trek. And so I really just want to bring attention to it and share why I love it so much. And so the first episode of the podcast is me sharing those personal reasons why I love it so much. And I honestly just wanted to share it with all of you, why this show means so much to me, and why I think it is a show that, if you have forgotten it and didn't really give it the attention it deserved when it came out, why you should maybe give it a second thought. And if you were someone who liked Star Trek Enterprise while it was on, maybe it's around the time to give it a rewatch. So yeah, for the rest of this video, it's just going to be the audio of my very first episode of the Long Road podcast. And if you want to get more of the Long Road podcast, they'll be releasing bi-weekly over on my Patreon page. If you are part of I believe it's the $5 and above tier, you can check my Patreon page for the specifics on it, but if you give it the $5 and above tier, you will get every single episode of The Long Road, and it will be a really fun road to walk down, as long as you have, of course, faith of the heart. I'm sorry, had to do it. I had to do it. It's been a long road, getting from there to here. It's been a long time, but my time is finally here. Yes, everybody, your time is finally here, because this is the very first episode of The Long Road podcast by me, Jesse Gender, one of the world's biggest Star Trek Enterprise fans, the ugly duckling of the Star Trek franchise. So yes, if you are listening to this podcast is going to be a Patreon exclusive podcast. So that means if you are listening to this podcast, you are most likely one of my patrons supporting me over on my Jesse Gender Patreon page, which to you I say thank you so much for being a Patreon. It really means a lot to me. I could not do all the things that I do without your help and your support. So honestly, it really means a lot to me. And I really hope that this podcast is a way for me to say thank you, to give you a little bit of something special and something extra as an appreciation for all that you have given me and all that you enable me to do. And also lets me share a little bit of my love of something that I really, really enjoy and that I feel often gets overlooked or kind of just dismissed kind of perfunctorily, and that is Star Trek Enterprise. This podcast is eventually what it's going to be. For most of the episodes, it's going to be me sitting down and rewatching every single episode of Star Trek Enterprise, start to finish, and then this sort of being a commentary track that you play underneath each and every episode that as you watch it. So you sort of put on the episode, and then you can kind of listen to me sort of give my thoughts and opinions and ideas about that episode as you watch it. It's sort of like a commentary track on a DVD or Blu-ray or movie. But for this podcast, this very first one, to really set us off from getting from there to here, from here to there to here. I was trying to get my Star Trek Enterprise theme song quote in there, but it didn't exactly work super well. But for this first podcast, I kind of want to just take a few minutes. This podcast will be a little bit shorter. It'll be about 10-15 minutes, and just talk about my history with Star Trek Enterprise and why I really enjoy Star Trek Enterprise. And then using this sort of podcast to sort of set up the feed and do all the back end stuff. So if you had any trouble, I should say before we get started, if you had any trouble getting access to this podcast on my Patreon page or wherever you got access to it, or there is any trouble getting there, please let me know. You can contact me through my Patreon messages, or you can leave a comment on wherever this podcast was posted, or you can even slide in my Twitter DMs. I do have my DMs open at the moment, so feel free to message me there. Just sort of let me know if you had any trouble accessing this podcast, if there was any download issues or anything like that. So if you're hearing this message, I assume you've gotten the podcast at this point. But if there was any sort of rough going in any ways that you think you can see to make it easier or smoother, please let me know, and I can try and make the experience a little bit easier to get into. We're all learning together. But yes, as I said, I want this podcast to be a way for all of us to, or at least for me, to share my love of Star Trek Enterprise. And the way I want to start off is, why do I love this show so much? Why does Star Trek Enterprise have a special place in my heart? I mean, it is one of the most maligned Star Trek series ever made. Typically when we think of the Star Trek franchise, most people's favorites are the original series, The Next Generation. Some people will say Deep Space Nine. Some people will say Voyager. Some people will even say Discovery or Picard. But Enterprise so rarely gets picked to be someone's favorite. And I'll be honest, I do not think Enterprise is the best Star Trek series. I would probably reserve that place for Deep Space Nine. But I do think that Star Trek Enterprise is my personal favorite Star Trek show. And the reason for that is, on one hand, sort of a critical thing, and on one hand is a very personal part of my story. So many of us, when we talk about coming to Star Trek, when we talk about what Star Trek means to us, we often tie what Star Trek means to us to a personal memory. I mean, think of every time I ask this question of, how did you get into Star Trek? So many of us say, my parents got me into it, or I got to watch it with my mom or my dad or my brother or my sister, sharing it with family, or talk about the community that Star Trek let us access. We talk about the Star Trek community. I mean, that's what we are right now. A lot of you, if you're listening to this, you're part of my Star Trek family and Star Trek community. Very much so, especially if you're a Patreon. So that informs what Star Trek meant to us. Or the other thing is that Star Trek was a show that let you feel represented, let you feel seen. I mean, and so many people reference Star Trek Voyager being such an important thing for them because you have the lead captain, the lead woman, Catherine Janeway, showing that women can be leaders too, and that's why that show meant so much to them, even despite some of Voyager's other flaws. So what does Enterprise have that it calls me so, that it speaks so much to me? Well, when I first got into Enterprise, how I found Enterprise, it kind of goes back to how I found Star Trek in the first place. As many of you may have heard from other times I've told this story, I first encountered Star Trek in a weird way through the Star Trek Nemesis audiobook, which is the weirdest, probably one of the worst places to start your Star Trek journey. But my parents were divorced. My mom and dad were divorced, and they lived about an hour away from each other. And they had dual custody. So what that basically meant is most Monday through Fridays, I went to school where my mom worked. She worked in a small little farming community outside of a small city, about an hour outside of Buffalo, New York. And so I went to that school, that little farming community school, 5 days a week. And then on weekends, Fridays or sometimes Saturday mornings, my mom would drive me the hour or 30 minutes to meet my dad somewhere in between. He would pick me up, and we would drive the other 30 minutes the rest of the way back to his house, and I would spend the weekends with my dad, and also my stepbrother and half-sister, because my dad eventually remarried, and we had our own little family there, which in many ways was a little bit rough, because it made seeing things like getting to hang out with friends on the weekend almost an impossibility in a lot of cases. But I'm not here to complain about all of that, but one of the things that my dad used to do, because he enjoyed that he got weekends with me, because it meant that I didn't have to spend time doing homework and things. We got to spend more time doing things together. But he always was excited when he saw me on Friday nights, or Friday when he picked me up after school to take me to Buffalo when we met. And he always wanted to kind of share stuff with me about things that he was excited about, things that he loved. And so I would always remember getting into his car, and he'd always be like, "Oh, let's listen to this song," or "Oh, I found this cool thing to listen to or to hear," or this podcast that at the time it was more radio shows than podcast. You got really into satellite radio at that time too. Listening to Opie and Anthony was his big thing for a while when I got a little bit older. But one day I got into his car, and he said, "Oh, listen to this audiobook that I got." And it was the Star Trek Nemesis audiobook. And I don't know if many of you know, back then, Star Trek just recently started redoing audiobooks, but there was this huge dearth of time where there was no Star Trek audiobooks. But back then, right around the end of their sort of Simon & Schuster's run on Star Trek audiobooks that was kind of ending by the time we got to Star Trek Nemesis audiobooks, the way they would do them is do them abridged. So instead of doing the full audiobook, they would kind of shorten them to fit them onto 3 hours of tape instead of CDs or now MP3s and audible.com, where you can just do the full 8 hour, 9 hour thing and it's totally fine. But in order to sort of offset the fact that they were shortening the book, they would add in these huge soundscapes and sound effects and music into all of their audio dramas and all of their audiobooks, not just the novelizations from movies. And so I listened to this audio drama, and it had all these sound effects and cool audio drama stuff and music, and I was just so enraptured by what this story was. And I asked him what it was, and he told me it's a Star Trek thing. And I had never heard of Star Trek. And so he started getting me into Star Trek to the point where I remember the first major thing that I got to actually see Star Trek on, the first major thing to watch, was he started showing me Next Generation. And he bought me the Season 7 Star Trek The Next Generation DVDs, which I devoured. And loved, which is also a really bad play. I had a really backwards way to. I start with Star Trek Nemesis, then Star Trek: The Next Generation, Season 7. It's just a weird. You can only go up from those things. To be honest, I gotta get some of the worst of Trek right at the beginning, and then you can really only get better from there. Only worst place you could start me off would be Code of Honor. I'd be like, wow. That would be such a terrible place to start, but maybe the best place to start because you only get better from there. But anyways. So those are the things, but they always, I loved Next Generation, but it always felt a little bit, I obviously it got me into loving Star Trek, but it did feel a little bit old fogey to me, this thing that my dad kind of liked, my dad likes Next Generation, I like it too, but, it's a little bit stiff, there's this weird kind of bald guy as captain, that sort of thing. So I was into it and really loved it, but it didn't really feel like mine, it felt like his. And then one day, my dad found Star Trek Enterprise. At the time, it was called Enterprise because they thought, the Star Trek thing wouldn't be cool and hip for the youth. But he found Enterprise, and he showed me the theme song, which is I know it was much derided, but he was so fascinated by the visuals of it. He loved how Star Trek Enterprise had these visuals where it would go through the entire history of human spaceflight. I mean, we've all seen the Star Trek Enterprise theme song visuals, and as much as you can deride the music, I mean, I like the theme song of Enterprise. I love it in kind of a cheesy send-up way, but I do earnestly love it. But because it's just fun to belt out. I mean, if you've ever been in a bar with a bunch of Trekkies, which I have, and that music comes on, they will sing their heart out, and it brings joy to my heart. You can't really do that with the Voyager theme. You can go da, 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 but it's more fun. It's been a long road. Anyways, that's a sidetrack. But the visuals, deride the song all you want, but the visuals of Star Trek Enterprise might be some of the most visually distinct and interesting visuals for any Star Trek show. I think Discovery. Star Trek Discovery with its sort of Da Vinci-esque visuals might be, and Star Trek Picard too also has a distinct visual style. Might be the most distinct visuals for any Star Trek opening theme, Star Trek Enterprise's opening theme. And he was just so enraptured by it that he just sat me down and was like, "Watch this. This is so cool," and I got into it. And at that time, I didn't know Star Trek Enterprise was a show. I didn't know Star Trek was a show that was on week to week. And my dad didn't get into it because he had other things. He was busy. He didn't really have time for a week-to-week show, but I did. I'm like, okay, there's a Star Trek show that's on right now with new episodes. And so I caught Star Trek Enterprise. The very first episode of the Enterprise that I caught was The Expanse, Season 2, the Season 2 finale, which was the first episode that sort of kicked off that, whole season-long arc for Enterprise. Basically the part where everyone sort of agrees that Star Trek Enterprise got really just solidly good. Starting with season 3 of Star Trek Enterprise. I would argue that I think there's Star Trek Enterprise seasons 1 and 2 aren't phenomenal, but there are some solid parts in it and some things that I do like about the seasons overall. But everyone sort of universally agrees that season 3 and right at the tail end of season 2 was really where Enterprise started to hit its stride and really started to get going. And it was a Star Trek show that felt mine in so many ways. It was a show that was current and modern that my dad didn't know much about. Like, he could tell me all about Next Generation or all these things, less so about Deep Space Nine and Voyager, but Next Generation was sort of his show. And Enterprise was the first Star Trek show that felt like I got to experience it on my own, and it was this thing that I loved and got to kind of share with my father. But the show was mine, and I didn't have to necessarily share it with him, but also in a way was sharing it with him. And I just got to watch Enterprise week to week, and I got so excited about it. It's like you get to see the next time on Star Trek Enterprise, and you get so invested in this story, in this world. It was just so much fun. As a little kid, this was the first major show that you get into in that way that felt like an adult show. Like, before then I was like into SpongeBob and all these other kid shows. Enterprise was one of those first like adult shows that I really got into. And it was just so much fun. And it sort of like mixed all these confluence of things, like my love for my dad and my family, my love for Star Trek, my sort of starting to mature and having interests that were sort of going beyond just like kid shows at the time. And so it just came at this moment for me that was just, it really was influential. And the fact that it sort of mirrored Enterprise getting good, quote unquote, was just just a great confluence of events. Sorry if you're hearing sadly outside there are some cars going by right now, so apologies if you're hearing some of the bass drop, as it were, going by right now. Sadly, I live in Los Angeles, and that's just something you got to deal with. Unfortunately, pretty much no matter where you live, you're going to be dealing with a lot of noise, which is unfortunate, and part of why I want to leave Los Angeles. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. You can help me leave Los Angeles by helping me on Patreon. You're already a Patreon. Why am I telling you that? Sorry, I'm just into the mode of like already like shilling my wares, as it were. Anywho, hawking my wares is the term. Anyways, so Star Trek Enterprise just came at a really particularly poignant moment in my life. So yeah. And I'm sorry, was checking something there, on my computer. So, but, I feel like it had to have something else. It's not just this important moment in my life that why I like Star Trek Enterprise. So what is it, especially about seasons 3 and 4 of Star Trek Enterprise, that made me feel seen, that I really liked? Well, the thing that spoke to me most about Star Trek Enterprise is something that still speaks to me today, and you can kind of see it in the work that I do on my channel. And that is the fact that Next Generation, we get this Starfleet, this Star Trek, where everything is taken for granted, that it's taken very much for granted that humanity is better. Like, Picard always gives these speeches about humanity is better. And even Kirk and every other show, besides maybe Deep Space Nine, sort of like takes for granted that humanity is better. And that's something that I love. And I very much something that I hold dear to my heart. Like, there's a reason that Star Trek informs my morality so much to this day. Is that like striving for a humanity that is better, striving for a humanity that can improve itself, can reach this place of loving diversity and loving difference of opinion and loving just seeing different things and exploration and just moving beyond these things. But what I loved about Enterprise was it didn't take those things for granted. Archer and the crew of the NX-01, they were people who were still striving for that. We're striving to be better. But more often than not, they failed at that. Archer made mistakes. Humanity made mistakes in Enterprise. And yet, the goal, the aim, the stated goal was always to be better. And yet they didn't always reach that. And that's something that just spoke so much to me on so many different levels. As someone at the time, as a kid who was coming to terms that I was transgender and hiding that, it always felt like there was a better version of myself that I could be, that I never could achieve. That there was this ideal version of myself, this, out woman that I could be that I just wasn't. And so to see, and so the person that I was right now felt less than. And so to see the crew of the Enterprise striving to be better spoke to that. I was also someone who was bullied quite often as a kid. And you see this thing in my work that I always try to empathize, even with people who don't necessarily empathize back with me. And I think that came out of being bullied a lot too. That I saw my bullies as people who were people. I mean, I went to a K through 12 school, and I was lucky enough that by the time I hit, high school, middle school, all the people that bullied me became my friends. And so I was able to sort of see this arc of these people who were cruel to me, too mean to me, become people that I cared about. I don't stay in contact with a bunch of my high school friends today, but I did come to believe that they were my friends, and I think they believed the same of me. And so that arc of seeing that the people who sometimes do the most harm, the people who are the most flawed, can still be beautiful people, can still be people that we care about, can still be people that grow and learn and become better. You see that in Enterprise. And you see that in the work that I try to do today. Like, all my videos, all the things that I do on my channel, all the things that I try to create are all about not condemning, not hating everybody. We live in a time today where everything is so polarized and everyone hates each other and everyone's trying to win an argument, trying to prove the other side wrong. And my goal is never to try, my aim with everything is never to try and prove someone wrong. My goal with everything is not to try to win an argument. My goals are, one, to educate, to teach, to try and show you a little bit more of how beautiful humanity is. And two, the sort of understated goal, the goal that I don't always state all the time, but is a goal nonetheless, is to try and have that education reach people who normally wouldn't seek it out. I mean, there's a reason that I use Star Trek to talk about transgender issues, to talk about politics and social issues, because there's a way to use these stories that people get invested in to speak to people who normally wouldn't seek these stories out. I mean, that's what Star Trek as a show is in general. I mean, Star Trek as a show is a way to hide social and political themes through weird science fiction-y type of stuff. And so that's what I kind of like to, that's why Star Trek speaks to me, and that's what my work speaks to me. And Enterprise did that in a way that was flawed. It showed the characters as flawed, which is the humanity that I want to speak to today. I'm not speaking to a humanity that knows better. I'm speaking to a humanity that's flawed. And Enterprise tried to show that too. And in many ways, Enterprise itself was a very flawed show, as Star Trek is also a very flawed franchise. Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, all of them, TOS, Discovery, Picard, all of them are flawed shows. They're by no means perfect. But Enterprise was the one that was most acknowledged to be imperfect. And yet I still found things to love. Seasons 3 and 4 of Enterprise, I think, are some of the best Star Trek there is. Period. Hands down. Not even an argument, in my opinion. I think you could just say seasons 3 and 4 of Enterprise are some of the best seasons of Star Trek. Right up there with some of the best of Deep Space Nine and Next Generation in the original series. And yet we sometimes forget that. And I just like remembering that. I like showing the diamond in the rough. Finding the beauty in things that people normally don't love. Because I think we often forget that in humanity itself. To look for the beautiful things in the things that maybe don't get love as much as they should. Whether that be a TV show, whether that be a group of people, maybe that be a person. I just like, I like being the person to love something that doesn't get as much love and then try to share that love with others. And that's what I want to do with this podcast. And that's what I want to do with my channel. And that's what I want to do with all of you. To take this show that maybe doesn't get all the love it should and give it love, and maybe, just maybe, let someone else find that love too. And love it not in spite of its flaws, but because of its flaws. Because its flaws are what make it unique. And its flaws are what make it beautiful. And its flaws are what make it human in a weird way. It's a human creation. Flawed things are human things. And I just love that Enterprise is a very flawed thing, and yet still manages to be beautiful in its own way. So yeah, I think I've kind of ranted enough about Star Trek Enterprise. I said this was only going to be 15 minutes, but this podcast turned out to be 23 minutes, so I'm looking at the clock right now. So I hope that you enjoyed my discussion of why Enterprise meant so much to me, and I hope that you will join me on this journey as we explore Enterprise. And I hope also you will join me on this journey with my channel. Like I said, if you're listening to this, I might share this episode specifically for free up on my YouTube channel and everything, just to maybe get people to be interested in it. But as we go down, the rest of these episodes will be Patreon exclusive. So if you are listening to that and listening to this and you are a patron, or if you're just someone who watches my channel and just enjoys the work, I thank you, and I hope you'll take this journey with me on my channel. Like, hopefully we are just at the beginning of what I can do and what this community can do, and what we can build together. And I am very much looking forward to getting from there to here and walking this long road with all of you. See, there I did it. Finally, I pulled it together right at the end. I managed to get my theme song reference in there right at the end there. So making that come full circle. So thank you to all of you. Thank you so much for supporting me, for listening to this, taking the time, and I hope that I can give back to you by sharing a little bit of love for this ugly duckling of the Star Trek franchise. So thank you for listening, and thank you for joining me. See you next time. Live long and prosper. Don't forget, if you want to get more episodes of The Long Road, you can help me out over on Patreon. At the $5 above tier gets you the Long Road podcast, but there are also tons of other different perks and different levels that you can give at, and any help is honestly greatly appreciated. But even if you don't do that, I would love to hear your thoughts about Star Trek Enterprise down in the comments below. Even if you don't help me out on Patreon, I really just want to hear what you all think about Star Trek Enterprise and why you may hate it, why you may love it, why you're ambivalent towards it. Let me know all that down in the comments below. And also don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any of my other videos or anything else like that. But beyond my Patreon, commenting, or subscribing or anything like that, I'm just glad that you joined me for this one video. And I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, especially Ashley Allen Bokikio, Miranda Janelle, Eli Berg Moss, Ashlyn Solstice, Christina Dalliance, Greg Gillum, Stephen Clinard, Munir Amlani, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wayne Twitchell, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, Randy Thompson, Jemshin, Lorena Mesa, Mari Neckar, Wellington Marcus, John Steele, Michael Beam, William Stewart, Gavin Robinson, Jason Knott, Maeve, Subraxis, Tonya Trummer, Wen Dizzle Bizzle, Gretchen Badger, Dante St. James, Polly Mina, Piston Twisted Garage, and Bree Beecher. Thank you all so much for your continued support.